Okay, so I was talking about this Python programming. And in our previous classes, we have seen that it is one of the most popular programming languages to run data science, data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning applications. So we saw why it is very important. One major reason is that Python is very simple to learn. Therefore, it can attract any professional, even though you are not in the IT field. So that is one reason Python is simple. Another good reason I can mention here, we said that Python have extensive libraries that is used to manipulate and interact with data. So we have libraries for numerical computation, the one we called NumPy. We have libraries for data analysis. We mentioned that one as pandas. We have library for data visualization, Matplotlib and Seamon. I think we're going to explore libraries like scikit-learn when we were actually doing machine learning. We have Keras, we have TensorFlow, we have PyTorch. So basically all these libraries have been detailed enough to help any data scientist or any data analyst to manipulate data and get insights. So that is our main objective. So as a data scientist, your main goal is to extract insights from data so that the insights can be used for decision-making process. So that is actually what we've been talking about. So in our most immediate previous class, I think we mentioned about what are variables. So please make sure you have actually finished all the notes to do with variables so that now you can start on data types. So I'm just doing a quick recap. Where in our previous class, we saw that variables are very important components in programming because they are used to store data. So we saw that as much as you are using a variable, it is basically a symbolic name that will refer to a value within your program. Therefore, we also mentioned that this symbolic name have some guidelines. I think if you go through that one very fast, I think it was here. We saw that there are some of the guidelines that we follow. One, we say that anytime you're calling a variable, it must start with a letter or an underscore. Let's remember that one all the time. The rest of the name may be letters, maybe numbers, maybe underscores. Always remember that you cannot use these special characters to name your variables. And finally, we have reserved words that we cannot use as variable names. So these are the naming guidelines that I think we mentioned as we create our variables. So to finish off with variables, I think I promised we are going to talk about local and global variables. I think this one will be effective in our subsequent classes as we are going to explore functions. So I want us to talk about the best practices that we saw in naming our variables. Please always remember, anytime you name a variable, you'll always have to use a descriptive name, a name that describes the value that you want to store within your program, okay? Always follow the naming convention very consistently and always avoid using single letters as variable name, except when you're actually using some loops. So at some point, we're going to talk about loops. I think that's actually the exception where we can work with a single name as a variable name. So in our today's class, which is the next building block, I think we mentioned the building blocks of programming. I think they're here. Good to mention them again for anyone who was not there. We mentioned that for you to effectively learn any programming language, then you'll have to follow this order here. So the first order is that, which I'm hoping, is that you understand what is a variable. So today we want to go to module number 2, where we want to explore various types of data. That is what we are calling data types within our programs, okay? So I want us to go there directly because I think we have a lot to cover. We have a lot to cover, and then we can start. So I'll give you 1 minute, just in case we have a student who is not with us up to here. So make sure you've actually gone through all the outline, and now you're ready to start on Python data types. So I'll give you just a minute because of time, and then we can proceed. So if you're ready, please open the notes to do with data types in Python. So these are the Python data type notes. So basically, you first want to understand what is a data type, and then how do you work with various types of data in our Python programs. So ensure you are actually up to here. So what you're going to notice here as you actually you are still following up is that each and every note for today, I have actually uploaded a notebook that we are going to use here. So after you've actually gone through the notes and you want to do the practices, you can actually click on the link here so that now you can do the class practice, okay? So I think now we can start for today's business. So let's define then, what is a data type, okay? So to understand data types, you're going to notice that Python offers quite a number of built-in data types that will allow developers to store, manipulate, and perform operations on different kinds of data. So just remember, a data type is basically a different kind of data that we can deal with in our Python programs. So you're going to notice that each data type have their own specific properties that determine how the data is managed and processed in Python. So to go through them very fast, I think this will be our guide. This is actually what you're going to learn in data types. It's quite a lot. I hope you can see them here. It's quite a lot. So the first type of data you're going to mention is numerical data types. So you as a data scientist, or you as a software developer at some point, you are going to deal with numerical types of data. So numerical data types are one of the data types that we are going to meet. But now the numerical data types have been subdivided or have been broken down into 3 distinct components. So in this lesson, we are going to talk about the integers, and you're going to see that integers are numerical data types that are represented as whole numbers. So they can either be positive or negative, the integers. So always remember that an integer doesn't have a decimal point. So anytime you're dealing with numerical values without decimal points, then we call them integers. For example, you can have the day of the week, the day of the month, maybe your age. So anything that is represented as a whole number without any decimal point, we are going to call them numerical integer data types. A good example is a number like 5. 5 is an integer. Negative 12 is an integer. 0 is an integer. So integers have an arbitrary size, which means that they can grow as large as the memory allows. So something to keep in mind, an integer is a numerical type of data without any decimal point. Therefore, they are represented as whole numbers. Please keep that one in mind. We are going to demonstrate that one in a short while. So another numerical type of data we have, we are going to call it a float. So a float represents now numbers with decimal points. So floats can also be represented in scientific notation. So for example, if you have a number like 3.14, so long as the number is in fraction format or the number have some decimal points, then that is a float. We can have negative 0.001, that is a float. We are going to see that one. 2.0 is also a float. So long as we have a decimal point to a numerical value in Python, that one is called a float. So floats are actually precise up to a certain number of decimal places, and they can be used for calculation that require real numbers. So let's say you want to get your weight. Let's say someone weighs 51.7 kgs. So that is a float. Let's say you're dealing with height, you're dealing with speed. Let's say the speed of a vehicle is, let's say, 80.7 kilometers per hour. So any value that is numeric and has decimal places, we normally refer to them as floats. Please keep that one in mind. I think we are going to demonstrate that one in a short while. So the last type of a number that you can work with in Python are the one we call complex numbers. Normally, they are not easy to understand, but they are very, very important, especially in hardware programming. So complex number represent a number which have both a real and an imaginary part. So that is what we call a complex number. So those people who do signal processing, I think they are very familiar with a complex number. We have a number that will have both a real part and an imaginary part. So they are written with a real part and a complex part using either capital J or small j to denote the imaginary part. A good example of a complex number is something like 1 plus 2j. So 1 is the real number, 2j is the imaginary number. Another number could be 3 minus 4j. So as you're going to notice later, I don't think you're going to work with them here, but complex numbers are used in advanced mathematical calculation, especially if you're doing signal processing or those students who are doing electrical engineering. They normally work a lot with complex numbers. So if you want to do hardware programming, you want to do signal processing, then definitely you will interact with the complex number. So basically, those are the three types of number we have in Python. So to repeat, we have integers, which are numbers without decimals. We have floats, which are basically numbers with decimal places. And then finally, we have complex numbers, which is a number that have a real part and an imaginary part. So those are numbers. Let me see whether there's a question to do with numerical data types. So we are going to demonstrate that one in a code in a short while. So I think there's someone asking, I think that is Brent. So Brent has been very active. Yes, that is a good question. Are we really going to work with a complex number at some point in data science? To my experience, I've never worked with them. So to be honest, I've never worked with a complex number. I don't think you're going to work with them here, but in case you have projects to do with signal processing or electrical engineering or hardware programming, then definitely that is actually where we apply complex numbers. I hope I've answered. So if you go to the second type of data, please keep that one in mind. So signal processing is where you want to analyze some sounds, some patterns, something to do with that one. Yeah, so I think it's a whole new topic on its own, whereby you want to work with any signal. It could be light signal and so on and so forth. So it's a whole topic on its own. So the first one is now the numerical types. We can go to the next type of data you can deal with as a software developer or a data scientist is what we call a text. So apart from dealing with a number, you might encounter a situation where you want to interact with a text. And now in programming, please keep this one in mind. Texts are normally called strings. And I think we saw this one in our first class because we said that a string represents a sequence of characters that are enclosed either in a single, a double, and now even calling a triple quotes. So strings can include letters, we can have even numbers, we can have spaces, we can even have special characters, so long as they are enclosed inside a double, single, or triple quotes. A good example of a string is the text like hello world. So the text hello world is made up of different characters in a sequence. So we'll have to provide some quotation mark. And definitely this is what we call a string. So a string is basically a text data type. A good example, another example of a string, someone can just say Python is great. Okay, and can you see that Python is great also have a special character like an exclamation mark. So this is also represented as a string. We can even have triple quotes to represent a string like this one here. So they normally say that strings are immutable. So we are going to explain that one later. So for now, just remember that strings are text data type and they are normally enclosed inside either a single, a double, or a triple quote. It doesn't matter. So I think we're going to demonstrate that one in a short while. Let's go to the third type of data you're going to meet. So we've mentioned about numbers. Now we've mentioned about text. So especially now, this is very interesting now for data scientists. As much as you're dealing with different types of data, let's remember that one, you cannot just deal with just one single value, okay? So there are those data types that we call the sequence type. So one of the sequence type of data is a data that stores collection of items. So for example, you can have sequence of employees, we can have sequence of teachers, sequence of patients in an hospital. So one way you can represent sequence, which is normally called collections, we have a list. So we're going to talk about lists at some point. We have tuples, and we also have a range. Okay, I'm going to define them. Just remember, these are the three sequence types, and we're going to meet them as we are doing our programming. Another one we have is set data type. So set is a data type where you want to put something without any order. So those people normally do I don't know if you can recall discrete mathematics. So those people have done some kind of discrete mathematics. We are talking about operations like union, intersection, difference. I think we are going to talk about sets in, I think they will make much more sense as we now demonstrate how to use sets. So something to remember is that when you're dealing with a set, then you'll have data that is enclosed inside a curly brace. Like this is actually called a set. And so long as you have the information inside the sets, they are unordered. So you can actually change any order depending on the operation. So I think that will make much more sense as we now demonstrate it in form of a program. Now, another type of data you actually need are dictionaries. So dictionaries are mapping data type. So if I'm saying mapping data type, it is a data type where we have a key and a value pair. So you want a key to map a certain value. So for example, if you have like a student information, school management system, each admission number or each registration number maps a certain student. I want us to relate dictionary in that aspect. If you're building an employee management system, then you can have employee registration number to map a certain employee. So a dictionary is basically a collection of key and value pair where each key must be unique. So remember, if you're actually building a school management system, each admission number or each registration number must be unique. Yeah, so in database system, we normally call them primary keys, okay? Yeah, so they actually allow us to store data that that have fast lookups. So you want to find data based on a certain key. I want to find a student based on this admission number. So a good example of how dictionary looks like, we have them inside curly braces where we have a key and a value. We have a key and a value. I think they are going to make much more sense as we now demonstrate them in terms of program. So far we've mentioned numerical types, we've mentioned text type, we've mentioned sequence types. We've talked about the sets. Now we are talking about mapping data types like dictionary. So the next one that is quite very important are the Boolean data type. So these ones are normally, at first they look very confusing, but they make much more sense, especially in our decision-making process. So what I can actually say here for sure is that you can never do decision-making process if you don't understand Boolean data type. So we are going to talk about them more in detail, but to just clarify them here, they are actually values that are represented either as true or as false, okay? So they are mainly used in control flow statement like conditional. So you cannot make a condition to determine whether a certain block of code should be executed or not, okay? So they will be very important in our decision-making process. And if you look at it here in our building block, if you look here in our building block, let me just take you back. Sorry for that one. Conditional statement or decision-making, it's our next module. That's why we first need to understand Booleans. So let me take you back. I hope I'm not confusing there. We first need to understand Booleans. Where are they? So they're here. We first need to understand Booleans so that now we can start to make some comparisons. So we can actually start to form some conditions. We can actually build some logical expression. So logical expression is actually how the computer now starts to think and how computers now are able to make decisions. So please remember to keep this one in mind as one of the very important data types that we are going to mention, okay? And then finally, we have a non-data type. I think I can just say that a non-data type is a data type that is represented without value. They are normally called nulls. So it indicates that we don't have a meaningful value to store in that variable. For example, here, X, you can actually store none, okay? So we're going to talk about all these 7 types of data. And I think in our next slide, we want to start with numerical data types. So if anyone asks a question out of the 7 data types that I've explained, please, you can now pass it on the chat. Then I'm going to answer. If we are ready, then now we are moving to the first type of data that we call numerical data type. But before we do that one, let us demonstrate how to create all these type of data in Python. So if you are ready, please click on this link. Click on this link. Then it's going to open a notebook. Here, it's going to open a notebook that will demonstrate all the 7 types of data we have in Python. In case we have someone who is not in our e-learning portal yet, I've shared the link to the chart here. So yes, I've been told to explain more on tuple. So because we are going to do them one by one, I don't want to confuse you here right now, but I think we can just call them sequence data type. Sequence data type, we are going to notice that they normally store collection of values, but we are going to actually explain them in more detail one by one, where we're going to explain what is a list, what are the features of a list. We go to what is a tuple and some of the features that we can use in a tuple, and also we have a range one by one, because now if we are able to interact with different kinds of data, then now you're able to start making decisions, you're able to start running some loops, now you're able to even start creating some function. So no, you're asking whether tuples are unique. I'm not sure what you mean by unique, but I can just basically say tuples are immutable. So I think we're going to meet those kind of terms. They are normally immutable, so you cannot change their values. I think we're going to do them in more details one by one. So I think they'll make much more sense there. But for now, let's see how they look like. And I've actually opened a notebook here. And it's actually taking us back to the print statement where we started by displaying values. So let's say I want to display 3 plus 2, so that is 5. I want to display 3 minus 1, that is 1. Okay. I want to display 3 times 2, that is 6. Now the problem here is that, yes, I think I'm going to mention that one later. So I think something we did earlier, we did yesterday. So in the next part here, we want to understand data type. So in the notebook here, we're being told that data types in Python define the kind of data that can be stored and manipulated within a program. Please note that we have another function called type. So we've been using print function to display data. I hope you can see. So normally function have this kind of a bracket that we call parentheses. So today we are going to introduce another type of a function called type. And you're going to see that it is a function that allows you to check the type of data, the type of data that is stored within a variable, okay? So to go very fast, I think I just want to demonstrate the code. I hope you can see. I have this piece of code. So I think I need to close all these other ones. For this one to work. Yes, so that's okay. I also need to close this one and also this one. So I'm saying that I have this value 10. If I print its type, can you see? I want to see the type of data, this 10 here. Which type of data is this one? So if I run it, the answer is int. So it's actually showing us that any number without decimal, it's actually an integer. So it's actually of class int. So please take note of that one. So the function type, let me just even demonstrate it here further. So this function type will actually tell us which type of data a value is, okay? Like this value, which type of data is this value? Is it an integer? Is it a float? Is it a complex? And so on and so forth. So it has actually demonstrated that 10, because it doesn't have any decimal, it's an integer. So if you have any number with decimal like 3.14, this is actually what we call a float. So we talked about the floating points. We've said a complex number is any number that have a real part and an imaginary part. So it's actually here, we call it a complex number. Then we also have a string. We've said a string is basically a text that is enclosed inside either single quotes it can be double quotes, it can be triple quote, and we call them strings. So normally strings represents any text data within your program. So to move further, now someone was asking about this one. We also have a list data type, which is normally stores a collection of values so long as they are inside a square bracket. So if you have a collection of values like 1, 2, 3, and they are inside a square bracket like this one here, we normally refer to them as a list. Okay, please take note of that one. But I think we're going to do them in more details in our subsequent classes. So if you want to understand a dictionary, it's basically any value that we have a key that represents a value. So this is very, very important, especially if you want to understand how pandas work. So pandas is built on top of dictionaries, okay? So we have a key and a value. So we've talked about sets. So normally sets, they are numbers that are unordered and they're normally inside curly braces. Someone was asking about a tuple. So the difference between a list and a tuple is that a list uses a square bracket. Can you see it is a collection of data where we use a square bracket to enclose the collection. On the other hand, a tuple uses a bracket. So list, we have a squared bracket. A tuple, we have just a bracket. So in our subsequent classes, we are going to notice the difference between a list and a tuple. And then finally, for Booleans, there are values which can be evaluated as either true or as either false. Remember, so we said they can either be true or they can either be false. So for example, if I compare whether 3 is equals to 3, then that is true. Okay, I want to see whether this 3 is equals to another number that is 3. So then that is true. Then because it's returning either true or false, we will call them as Booleans. So you can also have a false where we want to see whether 3 is greater or equals to 3. So then that is also a Boolean. So a Boolean is basically an expression that can be evaluated as true and as false. So someone has told me to pardon on dictionary. So please remember here, a dictionary is basically a data type where it's normally called a mapping data type. So I think I can add here mapping data type. Mapping data type. So if I'm talking about mapping data type, it's whereby you want to map a certain key to a certain value. I know this one is not making sense to you, but I think I can demonstrate one more here. I hope you do not confuse. Do not confuse. I can basically say I want to print the type of data. This is another function. So now to demonstrate how dictionary work, so let me just have a very good demonstration for you here. A very good demonstration. I hope I've not done anything wrong. Yes, I've not done anything wrong. So you just put a curly brace. So I can have a key like student. I can say county 047 can be mapped as county that is called, yes, we are not wrong. So it's called Nairobi. So we can actually say that county 47 has been mapped as Nairobi. So this 047 must always be unique. It must always be unique to map county Nairobi. I can put a comma here. If I want to map other counties, like I can even say county 001, I can still map it to a county that we call So let me use single, we call Mombasa. So you don't have to worry much. We are going to do everything here in more details in our subsequent classes. So for the sake of someone wanted to understand really what are dictionaries, they are normally called the mapping data type. We want to use a key like 047 to map a value Nairobi, another key like 001 to map a county like Mombasa. So if I run this one, still, I'm being told it's still a dictionary, okay? So please keep note of that one. Dictionaries, they normally map key to some values, key to some values. Yes, so I think I saw Brent also having another good question. Why do we say class? Yes, so that I cannot answer it better for now, but I think it will make much more sense when we talk about object-oriented programming. We are going to talk about it at some point, and at that point, then we are going to understand why integer is a class. So remember, we said object-oriented programming, everything is represented as object and classes. And we said that Python is an object-oriented programming language, just like Java, just like C++. So for us to clearly understand why we are saying that an integer is a class, then we'll clarify that one in our object-oriented programming class. So Riziki, I think you have a question. Insert, list, and tuple. Can one write string or should there only be numbers? That's a very good question. You can put any type of data you want. Like for example, I can have a list of numbers. Can you see? I can have a list of text. I can have a list of dictionaries. So you can put any type of data within a list or within a tuple. Any type of data is allowed. So this was just a demonstration to show you that this is basically a list of integers. This was basically a tuple of floating numbers, okay? Okay, there are so many questions. We have Eric, you're saying, does the key in a dictionary have to be a string or could it be of any data type? That's also a very, very good question. You're actually having very good question. To just answer it here very honestly, in dictionaries, a key must always be a string, as you've noticed, but a value can be of any data type. Like for example here, I hope I'm not confusing you. I can have a key like your PIN. So let's say I'm building an information system. I can have a key that is actually referring to a number. Remember, pins are numbers. So let's say your M-Pesa pin is 2343. So just to answer your question clearly, a key must always be a string. A value can be of any data type. It can be a string, it can be an integer, it can be a float, it can be a list, because I can even say here, I hope it's not confusing, I can even say here, another key like students, but I don't want to confuse you further. Let me just stop it there. Then we are going to demonstrate them as we do them one by one. But to just answer you here, a key must always be a string. A value can be of any data type. It can be a string, it can be an integer, it can be a float, it can be a list, it can even be a dictionary itself. Yes, so finally, yeah, so this is a very good one. I think, Dennis, I think you might be having some knowledge in programming. So you're asking whether a dictionary is something like a hash map. Yes, a hash map. Yes, it could be something like that one. It could be something like that one, a hash map, yeah. So I think I've answered your question and I've actually shown you all the types of data that we have in Python. So we said we have an integer. Anytime you're dealing with a number without decimal, we have a float. Anytime you're dealing with a number with decimal, we have complex. We talked about string. We've talked about lists. So long as you put a collection inside a square bracket. We've talked about dictionaries when we want to map values. We've talked about set, tuples, and finally, Booleans. So if that is okay with you, let's mark this one as complete. And then, what's happening? Let's mark this one as complete. So make sure for you to mark this one as complete. I saw this technical error for most of our students. If you want to mark this one as complete, then you'll have to scroll to just demonstrate that you've actually read everything here, okay? So after that one, then you can mark it as complete. So you've now finished the first part. Now let's go to the next part. Let's go to the next part here. So I've been talking about various types of data. So I want us to give a relationship between a variable that we mentioned yesterday and a data type now that we are doing today. So the relationship is very simple. We use a variable to store the data type you have. We can have a variable that can store a list. We can have a variable that is storing a dictionary, because a dictionary is a data type. It's a type of data. We can have a variable that stores a number. We can have a variable that stores a set, and so on and so forth. So just to clarify this one very fast, we can actually say that a variable in programming, it's any name that can refer to any data. So the data we are talking about can be an integer. So you can have a variable that has stored an integer. You can have a variable that has stored a float, or a variable that has stored a string. So this data that you stored in a variable can be accessed or manipulated throughout the program. So you're going to notice here now today that a variable will act as a container for storing values that can be used or changed during the program execution. So for example, I think this one you mentioned today. So I just wanted to give you a relationship between now a variable and a data type. So just to demonstrate this one very fast, because already we did it yesterday, I wanted us to open this notebook to explain what I mean here. Very fast, then you go to the next one. So this is basically a repetition, but I felt it is important to go through it so that now we can see the relationship between a variable and a data type. I don't know what's happening with Davis. I don't know what's happening, but let me check. I wanted to share the link first. I wanted to share the link. So I've shared it here. So if you want to access variables and data types, the relationships, then now we can have it here. Someone was sent. I'm not sure what's happening. I cannot see. I don't know whether it's your internet, but in case the challenge persists, you can push it. You can actually pass it on the WhatsApp group. So to proceed, now this data type, that is what I wanted to show you. This data type that we call a text has been stored in a variable called first name. So the relationship is that a variable must always be on the left side, like this one. A data type must always be on the right side. So if you want to connect a variable and a data type, we use an equal sign, okay? So this equal sign shows that this value, which can be of any data type, can be stored in this variable here. So this variable first name has been stored here, last name has been stored here. Country, which is Finland, has been stored here. City, which is Helsinki, has been stored here. So the first 4 types of data, your first name, your last name, your country, your city, all those types of data, they are represented as strings, okay? Now, to know your age, which cannot be to 50, is now represented as an integer. Let's remember that one. I want to know whether you're married or you're not married. So I want to know your marital status. So your marital status can be either true, you're married, or can be false, you're not married. So that is what we call a Boolean. So a Boolean is a data type that can either be represented as true or as false. So it's married is either true or false. You can have aspect like is present. Let's say in a meeting, is present. Are you present in a meeting? That is either true or false. Then out of that one, these are Boolean. You can actually have several skills. So I cannot put it in a single variable because you have a collection of skills. You don't just have one skill, but it's a collection of skills. For that reason, I need a list of skills you have. So you have a skill in HTML. Remember, HTML is a string, so you put a comma. You also know the CSS here, put a comma. Maybe you have a skills in JavaScript, put a comma. You've learned some React, you put a comma, then you have Python. So the skills that this person from Finland have, there are several. And that's the reason why, we put them inside square bracket and now represent them as collection data type. In other programming language, if you've done other programming languages, they are normally called arrays. So if you've done other programming languages, they are normally called arrays. They are collection of values that are stored in a single variable. Now, I want to map your personal info. For example, if I want to know your first name, this is the key. The value is this one here. If I want to know your last name, this is the key. The value is here. If I want to know your country, that is the key. The value is here. If I want to know your city, the value is Helsinki. So this is basically what we call a dictionary. So I was just demonstrating that you can have a data type on the right side, a variable on the left side. So you can have a variable that stores a string. We can have a variable that stores a number. We can have a variable that stores a Boolean. And please remember the Boolean must be capital T in Python. You can have a variable that can store a list, which is a collection. We can have a variable that can refer to a dictionary, okay? In such a way that inside the dictionary, we have a key that maps a value, another key that maps another value, and so on and so forth. So now from there, if you want to print them, I can basically print that your first name, this is just a text, and then I call your variable. I want to see the output here. I think I should run them first. I should run this one. Let me run it. I've run it, so it has been saved. So I think this one should work now. So the first print statement will basically say that your first name is referring to the value here, first name. So remember, this variable is referring to this value here, your last name. So the length of your first name, especially if you're dealing with a string, you're going to do that one later. You can actually get the number of characters in a string by calling the len function. Then you're told that your first name has 8 characters. This is actually how you can know the number of characters within a password for cyber security reasons. Then we have your last name here. The length of your last name is here. We're being told that is 7. Another thing, your country is Finland, your city is Helsinki, your age is basically, I don't know, 250. I want to know whether you're married. So it is referred to this Boolean true. The skills you have, it's referred to this list of skills you have. And then your personal information has been retrieved using this dictionary here. So I want to answer some of the questions up to there. I hope you can see that now with variables, we can always refer to these values that we stored here. So now these values that we have stored here can be manipulated anywhere in your program. I can even basically say that now you've aged. So I can even say now that your age is +1 because we are in a new year. So if your age was 25, this should have been 25 or to 50. Doesn't make sense. And now because you are in a new year, I don't have to call your age again. I don't have to modify your age again. I can actually call the variable and manipulate the data that is there. So now if your age was 25, it will update to, then I think I should run this one first. Then I should evaluate to 26. I hope you can see that one. So let me answer your question before we see how we can declare multiple variables in one line. So yes, so Brent, you're asking whether can we use yes or no? No, we cannot use yes or no. They have to be either true or false alone. So you cannot work with yes or no. You cannot work with yes or no. So it's only true or false. A condition can either be true or a condition can either be false. So there's a condition whether you're married. I want to know whether you're married. So that is a condition. It's either true, you're married, or it's either false, you're not married. There's also another condition whether you are absent or you're present. Okay? So that condition can either be true or false. So I think in all programming languages, we normally use true and false. Okay? I'm told to pardon. I don't know whether you've understood it, but if you want me to pardon again, I can do that one. Basically, a dictionary is a situation where you store values in key and value pairs. So we use a key to map a value. Okay? Let me demonstrate that one to you here. Let me create a new dictionary here so that it makes sense to you. I can say our counties. I think this one makes much more sense. If I say that our counties, these are the counties we have in Kenya. So I can start with county. Let me start with the key must always be a string. So the key, I can start with county 001. And that county always refers to in Kenya here. So that is Gemini, but you'll have to correct it first so that you understand. So the county 001 is Mombasa, in that order. So then you follow, I'm not sure, county 002 ni gani. So 002 in Kenya here, I'm not sure, but it should be a coastal county. I can just guess one, maybe Kilifi. I'm not sure though, or it could be Kwale, I'm not sure, and so on and so forth. So a dictionary is basically a mapping data type, whereby you have some keys that you map a value. So this key 001 will always map the value Mombasa. 002 will always map the value Kilifi. So this key must always be unique. But I think if it's not making sense to you right now, you don't have to worry much about it. We are going to do them in more details in our subsequent classes. So I hope I've answered all your questions. So let's finalize by looking at this is something we saw yesterday. Can you declare multiple variables in one line? I think I said this is yes, this is yes. So long as they are actually corresponding to the values they have, like the value first name is corresponding to this one, last name corresponds to this one, country corresponds to, I think now there's an issue. There was an issue here, there was an issue here. So first name goes with this one, last name goes with this one, country, so there should have been a country here before we go to the city. So we have comma, I think the country is Finland. So this was an issue, and I think I've now rectified it. Now we're good. So I think now we are okay. So now we can now go back and check. Now we can say first name refers to this value. Last name refers to this value. Country refers to Finland. Okay, we don't have the city. Yes, so I think I'll have to remove the Helsinki one. There's no city. There's no city. There is no city. Yes, so there is no city. Okay, now I think we are good. So they have to really correspond. If they don't correspond, you will get an issue. So now we can say first name, this one, last name, this one, country, Finland, your age is 250. Are you married? That is true. These are conditions. Are you married? It's like a question. A condition is like a question. Are you married? True. Are you absent? False. Something like that one. So now let me go back to your question, and then we can now move to the next part where we'll be talking about in details now, just like I promised you, we are going to dwell on each and every data type in details. I will start with numerical data types. We go to the string data types, and then I'll leave you to do the list over the weekend so that in our next week classes, we are going to proceed with tuples, dictionaries, sets, and booleans. And by now finishing by booleans, and now we are going to proceed to the decision-making process. So if you're okay with why variables are important, we can now, I think you can mark it as complete. And then we proceed to the numerical data types. But I think there are some questions, I've seen them here. Let me go through them very fast, and then we proceed. I think it started from Mwangi. You asked, so basically you make numeral string. Yes, you can make numerical value string so long as they are inside double quotation mark. So does a variable age autocorrect if you put a value that is not valid? It will not autocorrect. Maybe you just correct it. It will not autocorrect. It will actually remember the value that you gave it. I think, yes, yeah, I think now Mwangi clarified himself. He said by use of quotation marks, you can make numerical values a string. That is true. So, Brent, that's a good question. You're actually saying, so when we print, do we print a variable or the data type? So we normally put a variable. Let me just go back here. We normally put a variable so that we can see its value. So we put a variable here so that it can refer. It's just a symbolic name to refer to your name. Like this variable country, it's basically referring to the country. I don't know why it's saying Helsinki. It's referring to the country Finland. You see, I've made the changes here. So this variable country refers to the country Finland. So just remember, a variable is something like a reference point. Because I have a question, where is your country? I want to now refer to the name of the country that I stored here. And then the print statement will basically display that the country is Finland, okay? I want to know your age. So remember, there was a variable that I stored your age. So if I put it here, it will refer to your age as 250. Then if I want to, it cannot autocorrect so long as I make the changes like that one. So long as I make the changes like that one, now it has actually made the corrections. Yes, so I think so the last question, is there any variable like female or male? If you want a variable like that one, probably you can add something like, you can have, let me add it here. Just add it somewhere here so that it makes sense to you. Allow me to add it here. Let me add it here. So we can actually say is male. So if you want to get the gender, you can say it's male. that is true. So if this person is male, we can say that is true. So because you are already a male, you cannot be a female. Maybe if you're a transgender, but now that will be false. So that is actually how you can represent the gender. I want to know, are you male? Yes. So because you are male, you are not a female. I hope you've seen how it works, but I think we are going to do them in more details, each and every one on its own. So I think I have answered all your questions. So allow me for today, I want to focus on the first two. So by the end of today's class, basically I wanted you to understand the first one, which is numerical data types and string data types. In our next class, we are going to focus on list and tuple. I think we're going to do list, tuples, and dictionaries. So I would really urge you to join those classes because they now form the basics of data science. Because in data science, basically you deal with collection of data. So in other words, in data science, you deal with a list because you are dealing with collection of data that you want to analyze, okay? So for Booleans, you work with both true and false here. And in Python, remember the true and false must be capital T, capital F. Let's keep that one in mind. So Booleans can either be true or false. So if I'm saying that you are a female, then you are not a male. And like if you are a male, then you're not a female. So I had to include these two so that because gender is actually having two parts. If I have another student, we can actually add, is he a male or a female, in that order. Okay, so I think I've answered that one. I think this is very important to understand. Now let's dive into the first one, which are numerical data types. So I wish you open now this one if you don't have any other question. We now start exploring in more details what are numerical data types. So that now by the time we finish on this one, you will not have any question to do with numerical data types. Then from there, we'll go to string. From there, we'll go to list. So over the weekend, I'll add all the resources for all the other data types. And now you can go through them on your own free time, at your own pace, sorry. So with that one, and I can see there is no any other question, let's now focus on numerical data types. I am sure now you have some information that you only have the three types. They are the integers, they are the float, and they are the complex. So in Python, numerical data types are actually used to represent numbers. And now what can you do with numerical data types? You can basically perform mathematical operation. So anytime someone gives you a number, what comes into your mind is mathematics, okay? If I have a number, what comes into my mind is mathematical operations. So Python provides three main types of data. I think I've mentioned that one. I've mentioned an integer, I've mentioned a float, I've mentioned a complex. And then each of these type of data have their own characteristic and they have their own applications, okay? Like what you've seen here, that complex numbers are used in signal processing and electrical engineering. So to start with integers, it's basically a repetition, but it would present a whole number. It can either be both positive and negative. You said a float. They are normally the fraction, so they must have a decimal point. Complex, we've said there are numbers which have two parts. We can have the real part and the imaginary part. So let's see them in details in this Colab here. So I wanted us to have this Colab very fast. Let's have this Colab here. So I can pass it here, right here very fast. I can also share with anyone who is not in the platform, but I really urge you to be in our platform and to also subscribe in our YouTube channel so that you can be getting all this kind of recording. So if you open that notebook, it will land you here. Okay. So mainly in this notebook, we've talked about the mathematical operations that you can deal with in numerical data types. Okay. So we can talk about addition. I think I already did this one. I did subtraction. I mentioned about multiplication. I think this was an error. We cannot have a space here. And we can also not have a space right here. So we did division, whereby we said we use a forward slash. We did, when you want to do a division without a remainder, so you have to actually have to round it off. You use what you call the floor division. I mentioned yesterday about modulus, is whereby you return a remainder. If I take 3 divided by 2, I'll remain with 1, and so on and so forth. I think I mentioned about exponential, where actually you can actually take 3 to the power of 2. So if I run this one here, I think the first one integers, you can do all these types of operation, so long as the numbers you're dealing with are not decimals. So remember, integers are any number that you deal with which are not decimal, and I think the answers you get are actually being printed right here. So integers, I think I forgot to mention, these are the integers, and they are the numbers without any decimal places, like this one here. Okay, we go to number 2, floating points. If you want to see them now in more details, there are any number with decimal places. So if you want to print them here, you're going to see we have floating point. Yeah, so that was printed here. We have maybe the gravity in the Earth, according to physics. We have the 9.81 is the most famous value here. It's still a floating point value. Then when you want to see complex number, let's say you want to do some signal processing, you can actually have, this is a complex number. You can multiply a complex number with another complex number. And I think your result is right here. Yes, the result is right here. Yeah. From there, so you're also being reminded here that anytime you want to do mathematical operation to numerical values, which can either be integers, floats, or complex, it is always a good practice. It is always a good practice to first store them in a variable. First store them in a variable. That is actually what we call declaration. You're actually declaring a value to be stored in a variable. So for example, here we are saying that A is a variable name and 3 is an integer data type. So this 3 has been stored on variable A. Similarly, this 2, which is an integer, should be 2. It should be 2 here, has been stored in variable B. Now, after declaring these 2 values that you want to use within your programs, now you can always refer to the variable names. Instead of referring to the actual values, which we don't have the memory reference to them. Remember, we cannot refer to the memory for these 2 values. It is always advisable that before you do any arithmetic operation or any mathematical operation, the values that you're interacting with have to be stored in some kind of a variable, like these 2 here, so that we can have a memory reference. So I think that's actually what we are seeing here. So we can actually say that if I take the value of 3 and I add to 2, I'll get a total of 5. So if I want to see the total, I can always print it anywhere in my programs. I can actually say I want to print I want to see the total. So let me see what I get here. I think that is Gemini. Yes, we're going to talk about this one. Let me just print total like this one here. That's like this one here. So just to demonstrate the point. And then in our string operation, we'll now talk about the formatting options. Yeah, if I run this one here, now this one looks better. So that I can always refer to the total value I got. I can always refer to the difference between A minus B. I can always refer to the product. I can always refer to the division, remainder, floor division, and exponential. And as you can clearly see here, every variable name must be descriptive to the value. So you must describe the value that you're storing in a particular variable. So for example, if I add 3 plus 2, then I want to get the total. If I subtract 3 from 2, actually 2 from 3, sorry, I'm actually getting their difference. So I'm trying to describe the values within the variables. So that's actually what I wanted you to see. We don't have much to do with the integers. The only thing you can do with integers, floats, and complex, actually you can perform mathematical operations. So that is the point. If someone gives you an integer, then what you can do with an integer is to perform mathematical operation. So I can see there's no question there. Let's go to the next one, which is now actually the string data type. If this one is okay, please mark it as complete. I should be now uploading some quizzes today or probably tomorrow. I think yesterday we lost our servers, so I wasn't able to add the quizzes, but I think I'm going to add them probably today or tomorrow, where we don't have a class until next week on Monday. Yeah. So the next type of data that I think you've seen is now a string. And you say that a string is basically a text data type, something like your name, your location, your course. So any data type that is represented as a text, it is called a string. So according to the notes I have here, in Python, the string data type is actually used to represent sequence of characters. Let's say you want to deal with some words, some sentences, some textual data, then strings are the data type to call. So strings are one of the most commonly used data type in Python, and they're actually flexible and versatile. So they have several applications for working with text in various ways. So please always keep this one in mind. In Python programming, a string can be enclosed inside a single quote, a double quote, or a triple quote that we normally call the multi-line strings. So a basic string is a string that is represented in one line. So a string that is represented in one line is what we call a basic string. So a basic string is either represented as using this, the single quote or the double quote. So a basic string is represented in one line. So the opposite of a basic string is a multi-line string, where we use now the triple quote. So this is one line string, this is multiple line string. And then you're also going to see some of the string methods that we have to format it. So we can actually call some function like to lowercase, to uppercase, to replace, to split, and so many other ones. So I think this one will be, it's going to be very long. So let's open it up and then we'll finalize our today's class by strings. So let's see how to work with strings in actual programming class. So if you open that notebook here, if you open that notebook here, now this notebook is clearly demonstrating strings and their operation. So by the time you are actually done with this notebook, you're going to understand how to work with a string and several operations that you can do to a string, what we call methods. So any question? Any question? No question? Then that's good. So let's start. Like I was mentioning, if you're dealing with a string, you can have a single line string, something like a letter, so long as it's in a single line. Okay. So let me just run this one first. Run this one first. So I have so many sessions. I'll have to close some other ones. Cancel. Let me run it again. I think I'll have to manage some session. Terminate. Yeah. So this is one disadvantage of Colab. Normally, you cannot run so many notebooks. You'll actually bring the challenge of sessions. So I'm running that one. So it's still connecting to the server. And now I'm getting the output, which is okay. So now we are saying that here, I have a letter P. And so long as this letter P is represented inside quotation mark, it is actually a print. So if I print it here, it will print the letter P. If I want to see how many characters does this letter have, then I'll just call the len function, and then it's going to return 1, showing us that letter P is only made of 1 character. I can even have a string that have sequence of characters, like this one here, sequence of characters. So it's actually the name hello world. And if I want to see how many characters are in this sequence of string greeting, then we can have 13 of them, including the space. So if you actually count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even the comma, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So even counting the space. If I add a space here, it's automatically, I hope it should be adding. Now it's 14. So even counting the space that you have within the string. So the space is also counted as a character. So by getting the length, I can even have a sentence as a string. And so long as this sentence is in one line, we can either use a single or double quote. Now, by convention, something to remind you is that if you have short words and phrases like single characters or short words, it is now highly advisable to work with a single quote. If you have long sentences like this sentence here, then it's advisable to work with double quote, but you can always work with them interchangeably. There's no issue there. So it's what we call a single line string. So now to differentiate a single line string from a multi-line string is basically a string, we put a space here, that can be represented in multiple lines. So if I used, like for example here, if I didn't use a triple quote and I want to represent this one in a multiple line, you'll get an error. Okay, you'll get an error. That's actually something you want to avoid. So if you have a sentence or let's say an article, and an article is made of several lines, we normally use a triple quote like this one here. So you can work with this triple quote or this other triple quote here. So if you run this one, it's actually going to print a multi-line string, okay? So very first, we can talk about concatenation, which is basically a process where we can join one string to another. Let's say I want to print, let me just show you this one here. I want to print your first name and your last name in a single variable. So let's say your first name is this one, your last name is this one, and I also want a space, because we've also seen that a space is treated as a character. Then I can take your first name, I add a space, so I concatenate with now your last name. So it will actually join your name here, it will give a space here, and then it will give your last name here. And basically, this is basically what we call string concatenation. okay? So we can actually check the length of a string using a len function, which is a built-in function. So in our function classes, we're going to clarify what we mean by a built-in function. So if you say the len, it is actually going to return the number of characters that is actually making up a string. So that, for example, your first name is made up of 8 characters, your last name is made up of 7 characters. Now your full name will be made up of 15 characters. And then that's what you're getting here. So it should be 16 plus the space that you've added. There's a space you've added here, so then it should be 16. Yeah, like that one. In case you're getting any question, just ask. So to unpack, this is a very important feature, especially in data pre-processing, is when you want to get the characters within a string. So for example, I have a string called Python. It is made up of how many characters? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters. So I can declare 6 variables to unpack each character in my string Python. And that's why we are getting that A was able to unpack P, B was able to unpack Y, C, and that order. So if you want to access characters within a string, we are going to talk about the index in such a way that the first character is given index 0, okay? The next character is given index 1, the third character index 2, in that order. So if I run this piece of command here, the first letter, it should be the language at index 0. So in the string of the language at index 0, I'm getting the first character as P. Okay, so that's what you're printing here. It's giving us P. If you want to get now the next character, you go to the next index. So from 0, you go to 1. So from P, you go to Y here. And that's actually why you're getting Y. If you want to get the last element from the character, you can actually use the -1 expression. And then you're getting the N. So we have a lot to do here. And I think we might be tired. I don't want to exhaust you with all this string operation. And I feel they're very important, especially if you want to be a data engineer. So a data engineer is someone who focuses on getting the data from the source and then pre-processing that information so that it can be used in the right manner. So because of that one, I basically would say I would wish to stop there for today, in case I'm not inconveniencing anyone. So that now in our next class, which is now on Monday, 9 a.m., we will start by exploring all the characteristics of a string. Okay, all the characteristics of a string. Then from there, we will also mention some lists. Already the notes are there. So for anyone who wants to follow, the notes are already there. Then from there, I'm also going to add more notes to do with tuples, dictionaries, sets, and then finally Booleans. So that now from Monday, we go to Tuesday, whereby we are going to go to our third building block of programming, which is our decision-making process. So from there now, I wish to stop there for today. I would urge you to go through strings and lists. Then you're going to go through them together on Monday. So any question up to there? Any question up to there? Any question up to there? Especially now, I hope you understand what is a variable and you understand what is a data type. So basically what we are trying to do, we are trying to go through each and every data type in Python so that now we can start on decision-making process in Python. So I just wish to stop there. Now I can take your questions. All clear for Noah, so that's okay. I'm glad. If this is the first time and you're able to understand these details, then that is actually promising to me that we are going to do a lot in our coming classes. And one thing I can even tell you for sure is that the biggest barrier for data science and data analytics is to learn Python programming. So give me your question, then I'm going to answer them to give you. Yes, so let me answer your questions very fast. Then I will upload some quizzes for you to try out to see whether now we are actually together. So someone is asking, yes, no class tomorrow. So normally as Marshall team, we normally avoid having classes on Friday because on Friday we normally do our reach outs whereby we go to schools, we go to campuses to just impart knowledge to them. Yeah, so sorry for that one. So like I was saying, normally on Friday, we don't have classes. So our next class will be on Monday, but we have one-to-one consultation. I think that was mentioned during orientation in our offices at Apile, normally on a weekend, that is on Saturday. On Saturday from 9 to 1 p.m., I, myself, and my colleague Eric, we are normally at Apile. So in case you want to have one-on-one consultation with us, you can actually find us at our offices in Apile. I think the details of the location were shared during orientation, but if you're not sure, you can always ask on the group. So Tova, you're asking whether for data analysis, will you have a lot of use in Python? I can just say, yeah, we will actually use Python for fetching data, pre-processing data, and visualizing data. Then from there, as a data analyst, you're going to use some tools. So you'll use that Python much. So we're going to focus on some tools like Tableau and Excel and Power BI. But for those people who are doing data science, I'm sure you're going to use Python a lot. So I've actually remembered something. Let me just clarify that we are going to have a tomorrow morning class to actually make up for the class that we postponed in the morning. So those people who are not able to join our classes in the morning today, we are going to actually have a recap session tomorrow on Friday from 9 to 11 a.m. So I think I wish to clarify that one. So the missed class that we had today in the morning will be actually, we're actually going to have a recap of the class tomorrow morning from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. So yes, you're welcome, Dennis. So Brent, you're also asking. Yes, yes, Python is everywhere. But one thing is that it's easier, especially now if you be proceeding. These are the hardest thing to get. The hardest thing to get is to set up an environment, to understand what you're going to learn and to start it off. Start with variables and data types. So after doing the first two, which are the hardest, the first two are the hardest ones to understand variables and data types. The other remaining ones, I feel they are normally very, very simple to understand. Yeah. So any other question? Yes. So clarification, I think I've clarified about the morning class happening tomorrow on Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. for the class that we missed today.